All right, good morning. I am taping. Today is Wednesday, the 23rd of February. And as mentioned on here, I'm going to go over Chapter 18 JavaScript. I'm not going to lie to you, I forgot all about fixing up my pretest, and so I haven't done it, but I am going to. It'll be out there by the end of the week. I'm not going to give you any more tests from the book. All right, no more hands-on tests. I talked to Mr. Gudmested, and he said the last thing that he tested on was Flexbox. So I'm going to do the same thing. So today I'm going to go over chapter 18, nice and slow. And then we'll look at a couple of examples that get progressively more difficult. Everything that I do today, I will put out onto a GitHub repo by the end of the class period. Tomorrow and Friday will both be lab days so that you can catch up and hopefully have everything turned in. Um, as far as the chapters 11 through 15 stuff. Nice. Think I told you could have until the end of the day today to get through the chapter 10 stuff. Now, next week we will begin the bootstrap portion of the class. We're going to hit it hard. And what I mean is I'm going to go out to getbootstrap.com to start the class, and we're going to build a website right away. All right, first thing. And we're just going to keep tweaking it and working on it and working on it, because my hope is that by the end of next week, we can just spend 1 week on Bootstrap and then go on. All right. Okay. So with all that said, let's get into it. So this is chapter 18, again, the last chapter of our book, how to use JavaScript to enhance your web pages. Now, one thing to realize about this book that we are using and the book that we'll use following this, the JavaScript and jQuery book, they all talk about how to use JavaScript on the client side. In other words, they talk about how you can add JavaScript to a web page to make it more interactive. And for years, that was the only thing you really could do with JavaScript. But as you'll discover when you take the AWD1111 class, all right, for some of you that'll be in summer, and for some of you that'll probably be next fall. But when you take that class, you'll learn that you can also use JavaScript on the server side. In fact, you use a part of JavaScript basically that's known as Node.js. I don't want to talk about that anymore now, but just so you know that this book only solely talks about JavaScript from the client side. All right. There's a lot of terminology in the chapter. All right. There's a lot of concepts in the chapter. There's a little bit of code in the chapter. But one thing to realize is even if none of this makes sense, even if not a lick of what we do today makes sense, remember that pretty soon we're going to be going into this book, Murox JavaScript and jQuery. All right. And when we look at this, and I'm not going to run through all these, but there are 19 chapters. Just so you know, this is the same chapter, Introduction to Web Development. It's the same chapter that we had the HTML book. So I'm going to jump right into, when we get into the JavaScript book, right into chapter 2. And much of the material that's going to be discussed today, you'll see again later on when we start going through the actual JavaScript. So what I would recommend, since I'm going to give you all this code anyway, don't do any code along or anything, but just watch. And if something, if you got any general questions on anything, please feel free to ask. All right. The other thing that's discussed in here is jQuery, and jQuery is a part of JavaScript. jQuery is a JavaScript library, and you can kind of look at it that it sort of supercharges what you're able to do with regular JavaScript. It allows you to do some things that would be almost impossible to do without it. And when I say that jQuery is a JavaScript library, we'll actually take a look at it later. And it's several thousand lines of code and built-in routines that you can use. All right, by basically just adding jQuery to your project. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit too. Now you'll notice in here that they'll go through this email list application, and they'll first do it with just JavaScript, CSS, and HTML, but no jQuery. Then they'll go back and they'll add some jQuery to it. It's the same application, but they've just modified it to add some jQuery. And then the chapter will end how to use JavaScript as a non-programmer. And basically what they're saying there is some of the stuff that we've kind of looked at and maybe haven't looked at that much before, but some of the things that you can do with something, for example, like CSS, but it might take a lot of CSS to do. You can do it just a few lines of JavaScript. All right. And we'll talk about that. Okay. So then taking it from the top, and again, not my goal in here to read, but we will be using JavaScript as client-side as a client-side processing tool, meaning that what we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up adding JavaScript directly, all right, not into our HTML, not into our CSS, but we'll have a JavaScript folder and we'll add stuff in there. And if you don't, again, you're going to see it in just a couple minutes. All right. So again, what JavaScript will help you do is it'll help you add interactivity into your program. The example they give here is not a great one. All right. Because all it's going to do is it's going to say here current date. Now for us, it would say current date, WED, Feb 22, 2023, etc. That kind of thing. But it does show you something in that. What are we doing right here? I mean, this might look totally new to you guys. All right. You'll notice that in both of these paragraphs here, we've got a new element that we're using that's called script. You're going to see the script element in display throughout this chapter. Script allows you to add JavaScript code, either directly or indirectly into your programs. All right. This is adding it in directly because you can see what we've done here is inside of this paragraph tag. The first thing that we're doing, and where it says var today equal new date, the first thing that we're doing right there is we are creating what's called a new date object. And what a date object has in it is the date and the time. All right. So for instance, like I said, if I ran it right now, it would have today's date and about 8:15 for the time. All right. Then we're grabbing just the date portion of it right there. And that's what you see right here. So the current date is right there, just a verbiage. And then the today.date string is this part. Now, we've never seen document.write before. We've never used that. All right. What document.write does is it allows you to write directly to a web page. I want to say that again. What document.write allows you to do is to write directly to or on, however you want to refer to it, a web page. Now, just so you know, we're not going to be using document.write very often because I think at least it's more of an archaic way of doing things. It's not that it's wrong, but there are just other ways of doing things, doing the same type of thing that I think are better. All right. Okay. Then we create another date object. All right. And what we grab from there is, as you can see, the full year, in this case, 2021. All right. So what they're doing again is they are going out and they are calling, basically, they are creating a JavaScript object, kind of creating it and then recreating it. It's called today, and it's going out and it's grabbing a bunch of information that JavaScript keeps for us. And if that confuses you, please don't let it. It's not that this is really that hard. Not only that, once we get into the Muroc book, I believe we're going to have a whole chapter that's just dedicated to the use of the JavaScript date object. So there's a lot more to it that we'll learn about later. Now, notice what they say here. JavaScript is a scripting language. I'm not going to disagree with that. That said, it is a full-fledged programming language. All right. I want to say that again. JavaScript is a programming language. And due to the fact that JavaScript can run both on the client side and on the server side, it is one of the most popular programming languages today. When you run JavaScript totally on the client side, like what we're doing, that's typically referred to as front-end JavaScript. What you'll do when you take the AWD1111 class and you're writing JavaScript on the server side, that's typically called back-end JavaScript. And if you've ever heard the term of being like a full stack JavaScript programmer, that means that you can write JavaScript for both the front end and the back end. And by going through the AWD program here at Rankin, that's one of the things that you learn is you do become a full stack JavaScript programmer. All right. As it says, JavaScript can modify the contents of a web page. All right. When it's loaded or in response to a user action. Not only that, it can continually update. You may or may not remember this, but a while ago when we looked at a website, this was quite a few weeks ago, I showed you something, and on the bottom of the screen, we had the date, and there was basically a running date and time that was on there. That was JavaScript to do that. All right. Now, just like there's multiple ways of including CSS, there's multiple ways of including JavaScript. Now, I don't want to confuse you. I really don't, but I want to show them to you just so you can see what they're talking about. So before we even go through their example, I'm just going to create a garbage little right here. I'm going to create a garbage little folder that I'm going to conveniently call garbage. All right. And I'm going to open up that folder with Visual Studio Code. Now, right now, there's nothing in it. All right. But I want to show you 3 or 4 different ways that you can add JavaScript to a page. And I'm not showing you multiple ways to confuse you. I'm showing you multiple ways because different programmers will include the information in different ways. All right. So let me come in here and start by I'll create an index.html file, and we will put in our exclamation point and hit tab. All right. And we'll put in here JavaScript examples. Okay. So again, I'm going to show you a few different ways that you can include JavaScript. All right. Now, the first way I'm going to show you is putting it right inside of the body of my program. It's allowed, but it's not recommended. There's not going to be anything in here other than I'll put in an H1 tag. All right. And I'm going to put inline JavaScript shown below. Okay. So I'm going to put it right here. All right. So how do I do that? Well, I come in here and I say script. Now I'm going to put in here what's called an alert, and it's not going to do much, but you're going to, and I'm going to put in here alert. Oops, it's got to be a little A, sorry. So alert, hello from inside, I don't know, the body. It doesn't really matter what I put in there. All right. And a semicolon on the end. That's all I'm going to put in there is just script, hello from inside the body. Now I'm going to save this and I'm going to go run it. And there is my alert. That's your first JavaScript program. Hello from inside the body. Now, nothing else is going to happen in here. Notice it says inline JavaScript shown below because it actually ran the JavaScript before it ran the HTML that was in there. All right. You say, well, why would it run the JavaScript first? We're going to talk about that at a later time. All right. But that's one way of doing it. Another way we can do this is you can take these lines of code and we can put them, believe it or not, right up in the head section. All right. So I'm going to save that. And I'm going to run it again. And again, you see the same message. All right. It shouldn't say from inside the body anymore. All right. Because technically we're inside the head. All right. And I don't even really need this line, but I'll just leave it there anyway. So hello from inside the head. And again, I will come in here and open it with live server. So now it's hello from inside the head. All right. Now, there's other ways that you can run this as well. I'm going to show you two of the other ways that this is often done. All right. And the first way is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to leave this right here, but I'm going to grab this line of code that's got my alert in it. I'm going to cut it and I'm going to create in here a new folder that I'm going to call JS for JavaScript. All right. Then inside of there, I'm going to create a new file. And that new file is going to say, I just call it scripts.js. And I'm going to paste that line in, that alert line. Nothing else in there, just that line of code. All right. And it doesn't actually matter if I put a semicolon there or not. Notice when I save it, it removes it. We'll talk about that in a later time too. But so how do I run this now? Well, now I have to include this file, just like we had to include CSS files, but to include a JavaScript file, you say script source equals, and it's under my JS folder, and it's called scripts. Whoops. It's called scripts.js, just like that. So now my JavaScript is external to the program. All right. So again, I'm going to do a file, save all. Okay. And I'm going to run the program again. There it is. All right. Now I want to show you two more ways, and I'm not trying to confuse you or waste your time, but I want to show you, believe it or not, the debate many people had over this for a long, long time. And I'm going to show you how, in a way at least, it was reconciled. So I'm going to grab this line again, and I'm going to put it right down here, right before my body section. All right. So again, I'm adding it, but up here, I added it in the head section. Down here, I'm adding it in the body section. I'm again, let's see. Let's change the message just so you can see that it's indeed changing. So now it's inside the body again. All right. And let me do a file save all. We'll go back to here and it should come up and say, hello from inside the body or whatever we said there. Hello from inside the body. There it is. All right. Now, what's the big deal? If you can put it anywhere, then what the heck is the big deal? The big deal is it is possible that there is something in here that you want to run. All right. Remember, I just said that the JavaScript runs before the HTML has been loaded. And it's possible that I could put something in this file that I would want to be able to use to manipulate the HTML that hasn't been read in yet. All right. That's why for years, what people did was whenever they added script tags, and you can have multiple ones of these if you need them, they were always put at the bottom of the body section, right before your ending body tag. And the reason for that is everything that's in the head and all the stuff that's in here should load before that loads. Well, that didn't always happen either. So people thought about, well, how can we fix this? How can we literally set this up so that we're always sure that the HTML loads before our JavaScript runs? And the way they came up with it was they said, let's put it back in here. And we're going to add in here the word defer, which is a key word now. And it's orange or red. And what that means is do not run this JavaScript program until everything that is inside of the body has loaded. So really, this is supposed to have the same effect as putting it right down here. All right, but supposedly at least, it guarantees that it will not run until all of the HTML has been loaded into memory. So what I've just shown you there are 4 or 5 different ways that you can go and add JavaScript to a program. All right. So a natural question then might be, okay, fine. Then which one is preferred? Technically, it's the one that I'm showing you right now, which is one of the reasons I showed it last. All right. So jumping back into our book then. All right. The authors are going to show you 3 different ways. But now it should make sense to you. So the first one says, all right, a script element in the head section that loads an external file. Okay. That's what I showed you. And then I added the word defer to it. Here is a script element that embeds JavaScript. So I showed you that as well, putting the code right in the head, then putting it right in the body. So you've been shown all of those. All right. And when you look on here, when you want to add this, you say script source equals, and then in double quotes, wherever the file is. And you must put an ending script tag in. Now, when we put in our link tag for adding our CSS, we did not have an ending tag. Here you must put one in. Also, when you look at that little chart that's on the top here of page 533, they talk about a type statement. You can say in there, either before or after this source, you can say type equals, and then in double quotes, text/JavaScript. That used to be required for putting in the MIME type. Basically, we're letting the system know that the type of thing was JavaScript. In much the same way, it is legal when you add a link tag for CSS to put in type equals text/CSS. We never did that, but you can. And sometimes in legacy code, meaning code that's older, you'll see that in there. But okay, hopefully now you guys are back and I didn't, you didn't miss too much. All right. Um, we are having storms in the area. And what I've been told via charter this morning is there's a possibility that the internet connection can go down. All right. So far, the storms have not arrived here. All right. They mentioned there on that second bullet, if the script element in the head includes an external JavaScript file, it runs as though it was coded with the script element. Again, just the same kind of way that when we used external CSS. It's nothing, nothing big in there. All right. Okay. Now, the next thing that they discuss in here, this will probably be for some of you amongst the hardest things that we go over in the other book. And that is using what's called the DOM, which is an acronym, which stands for Document Object Model. I'm actually going to show you a little of that later in the period. And again, you're going to get all of the code. Makes sense. What they're going to explain in a few pages here, we will be discussing in depth in the book. Because when you look at the book that we're going to be using, chapter 6, which is a fairly long chapter, is how to script the DOM with JavaScript. So all we're trying to do here for lack of better words, is to give you an introduction to some of this stuff. By no means do you go through a chapter in here, all right, and go through a few pages in a chapter and say, well, I get everything that's in there. All right, because if you do get that, you really shouldn't be in this class. All right. When you work with the document object model, okay, that basically everything you put on a web page, every element that gets on there is put in there in as what's called a node. And if you say, I don't understand what a node is, you weren't supposed to. All right. But they give you an example here. Notice what we have. We've got this doc type statement. Then we've got HTML. And really, when you think about this, head and body are both children of HTML. Title is a child of head. H1 is a child of body. Form is a child of body. Label, input, and span are children of form. All right. And that's what they're showing you here. If that doesn't make a lot of sense, please don't let it bother you one way or the other. But that said, if you can learn to harness the power of the DOM, there's really very little that you can't do to a web page using HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. The other thing that you're going to notice, what's going to become very important, is when we've been coming up here, most of the time we've been using an ID. There's an ID of email form, there is an ID of email address, etc. Because we're going to be able to use, amongst other things, when we want to grab an element that's on the page, we will be using something called get element by ID, where we'll be able to do something programmatically by using what we used for that ID. All right. So like I said, this is just a quick little explanation. See in here, these are all nodes. All the things that you see right here with text, technically they're not nodes. All right. Or depending on the book you read, they're called leaf nodes. Notice that everything that says text on there, that's the only stuff that doesn't have anything underneath it. They're called leaf nodes because they're at the bottom of the tree. So HTML is at the top of the tree. As I mentioned to you, head and body are the two children. They're siblings, but they're the two children of HTML. All right. Title is the one child of head, and H1 and form are the two children of body. All right. And for form has three children, a label child, an input child, and a span child. And again, that's all I want to say about it for right now, because it's so doggone easy to get wrapped up in this stuff and get confused over what all of it means. All right. So if you want a little more, again, here's their definition, and it's pretty good. The DOM, or document object model, is a hierarchical collection of nodes. So, there is an order to it, just like there's a hierarchy when you've got a company and you've got maybe the president at the top and then the COO, etc., the vice presidents. It's the same kind of an idea. All right. It says it's built as the page is loaded by the web browser. When you use JavaScript to modify the DOM, it's known as DOM scripting, or scripting the DOM. All right, as it says, the web browser changes the page to reflect the changes to the DOM. So in other words, this is how JavaScript is able to be used to add interactivity to a web page. And that's exactly what they're saying here. Now, they mention a couple methods that you can use to do this. And the first one that they mention right here is the one I already told you about. And that is get element by ID. All right. Now you might look at that and then look at this and say, I don't have any idea what the heck this means. var $sign, yeah. And yeah, it's a little bit confusing, but it's like anything else. it's a little bit confusing until you use it a couple times. Then you're like, oh, okay, I understand. But I will tell you again, what they're mentioning here is in chapter 6 of our book that we'll be using. So we're not going to get into using the DOM like this for quite a while. So if it makes absolutely no sense to you, please don't let that bother you. All right. The other thing that's in here is what are called events. And an event is something that you do that you can associate code with. Now, for example, Grant was in the C# class last semester, as were a few of the rest of you. All right. And we had said double clicked on a button, you open up that button's click event or that button's event handler, and then you could add code to it. You can do the same kind of thing in JavaScript. Now, what I'm going to show you after the break today is this is just something I wrote and modified yesterday. Now, this is meant to be part of a website. Right now, there is no home page, there is no about page, there is no FAQ page, there is no contact page. But you'll notice if I come in here and I leave this blank, I'm going to get an error message that the height between 12 and 96 is required, and now it goes away. So if I put in something that's too big and I click, it gives me the same message. And again, it'll go away in a matter of seconds. But if I put in a valid height, but I don't put in a weight, now I get a similar message for the weight. All right. And again, if I put in something out of range for the weight, I again get that. All right. But if I put in something valid for the weight, all right, now that's somebody who is 6 feet 1 inches tall and they only weigh 111 pounds. So they're going to end up being probably very underweight. But notice when I click this now, I get a calculated body mass index or BMI and their status saying that they're underweight and a picture of an underweight person. If I run it again and change this to 166, now I get an optimal weight person. If I make it 200 pounds, now I get an overweight person. And if I make it 333 pounds, now I get an obese person. All right. All I'm trying to show you right there is when we run this, there is code that's associated with this button and code that's associated with this button. Now, even if you've never had any programming before, hopefully there's really about 4 things that we want to have happen, really 5, but 4 that we'll talk about for now when I click this button right here. Hopefully you can think of what those 4 things are. We want what's in here to disappear. 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 We want the picture to go away. Ideally, if we're nice, we'll also put the cursor right there so it's flashing in there. But if I click reset form, now you can see everything has happened. Was too foolish not to reset my cursor there. All right. So what I'm showing you there is an example of a button click, which is an event handler. All right. As it says, one other concept you should be aware of is the way JavaScript handles events. An event occurs when an action like loading a page or clicking a button occurs. The code you put in is known as the event handler. So what's shown in here are some examples of event handlers. So when you click the button that says print the page, all right, that's what's going to end up running. Window.print, so basically it'll print it. And again, if that doesn't make much sense or any sense, don't let it bother you. We will go over this DOM event lifecycle that you see in here. We will be going over all of this stuff later in the semester. All right. All right. So the first thing that they show in here is this email list application that's built solely with HTML, CSS. I don't think there's much CSS in here, and what's called vanilla JavaScript. So it's just regular JavaScript. There's no jQuery in it. There's no Node.js in it. There's no nothing in it, but regular JavaScript. So it says here, the next two figures present the simple email list application. It asks the user to make 3 entries and then click the Join Our List buttons. All right, the asterisks to the right of the entry say that each entry is required. When you click on the button, JavaScript attempts to do what's called data validation. So it attempts to make sure you've got something in each one of these entries. All right. So it says here, if you read chapter 13, you should be familiar with the HTML in the figure. All right, then let's take a quick look. So this is what they've created in here. You can see that they've added a couple things. And what I mean is what's been added here is some CSS to draw a border around the whole thing, some CSS to make our H1 heading blue, all right, etc. But most of the rest of it, you would probably be able to create this fairly simplistically. All right, there's a label and a text box, a label and a text box, a label and a text box, and a button. Then next to each one of the labels, to show that they're required, you can see 3 asterisks. Those are added, I believe, in here as spans. All right. Now, let's take a look at the code, which again, if it doesn't make a boatload of sense right now, please don't let it worry you. All right. In our head section, you can see that at the bottom of the head section, that's where they're adding the JavaScript file. They don't have the word defer in there. Defer is a relatively new concept, but I'm still surprised they didn't put it into this book. We will be using defer all the time when we add our external JavaScript. It's just a good idea. All right. So then in our body, this is where we're building that form. So here's our H1. It says, please join our email list. That's right here. And then here's the form. Okay. So you'll notice that we have 3 labels and 3 inputs of type text. For whatever reason, when they didn't make the email label, they didn't make that of type email. All right. So the only thing that we're going to check in here is the presence or absence of a value in the email boxes that you see here and here. We are not going to validate that what they put in there is a, well, it is a regular email address, like something at something dot something. All right. I mean, if they put hello in there, it's considered a valid email address and a valid re-enter email address is what I'm telling you. All right. And again, you see those spans that are here and here and here. If we put something in each one of these 3 boxes here, so if I put hello, hello, hello in there, all 3 of these asterisks are going to go away. And when we click join our list, we're going to just get a message that says something like welcome to the list. But if we leave any of these blank, these asterisks are going to turn into error messages. And that's what they're trying to show you right here. So there's an email address 1 error, an email address 2 error, and a first name error. Well, that code for those errors is what's put into the JavaScript right here. And again, if this is the first time you've looked at JavaScript, you're probably thinking, I don't understand what any of this means. And I'd be more surprised if you did understand it. All right, I'd be more surprised if you did understand it than I would be for you to say you don't understand any of it. This thing right here is a shortcut. We'll talk about it at another time. But basically what it says is I want to be able to use $sign instead of document.getElementById. I want to use an alias, so I want to use a $sign. And every time I use the $sign in here, it means the same thing as if I said document.getElementById. So when you look at this one right here, at this line, this right now where it says var email address 1 equals $sign, then in email underscore address 1 dot value, all right, using the $sign is easier than typing in var email address equal document.getElementById, then put in the parentheses email address 1, then dot value. So that's all it is it's a shortcut. That's it. All right. Then we have something in there that says var is valid equal true. Well, one of the things that you're going to learn about, not today, but you're going to learn about it fairly quickly, is when you work with JavaScript, you have different data types. For instance, if let's suppose that I was selling widgets and I wanted to know how many widgets had been sold. All right. And there had been 35 widgets sold. Well, that would be a numeric data type. And in particular, it would be a whole number type, but it would be a numeric data type. If I wanted to know somebody's salary, and let's say it was $56,110.12 a year, that would be another numeric variable. Well, the variable you see here is called a Boolean variable, Boolean, Boolean variable. And what that means is the only values that it can hold are true and false. Okay, so now we're assuming it's true. But if we come in here and we find there's nothing in the email address, then that'll be false. All right. And what's going to happen is that asterisk that I showed you is going to change. So it says this field is required. Then we do the same thing for the second email, and we do the same thing for the first name. So what we're doing in there is we're trying to perform data validation to make sure that each one of these three things has a value in it. You can see here, we have left off a couple things. Now, notice the message. This entry must equal the first entry. Well, this is re-entering the email address. So we put zach@yahoo.com there and nothing there. They're not equal. So this is the message we get. If we'd have put in here, right here, if we'd have actually put something in there, but let's say we put in zach@hotmail.com, all right, or zach@gmail.com, we would have gotten the same address or the same error message, because the only way that we won't have that error message there is if we put in zach@yahoo.com. On the other hand, when we get down to the first name, it's just empty. So we get a generic message that says the field is required. This particular example that you see right here fails input validation. I want to say it again. The example we see here fails input validation. So we get the error messages. Those red asterisks that you saw have been replaced with those two error messages. And that's what they're talking about in here. All right. And if you can at least have a fundamental understanding of what I'm talking about, that's all I'd expect. All right. Okay. So now we're going to jump into jQuery. All right. And just so you see it, I'm going to go out to jQuery.com. All right. And it's up there, in my opinion, is one of those really, really, really ugly websites. All right. Doesn't look like much when you look at it, but let's take a look at a couple things here. All right. So first of all, it says you can download it right here from clicking on this. All right. So you can download it right there. And there's other ways that you can bring it in to your program as well. But let's see what it says here. It says the jQuery has a lightweight footprint. What does that mean? It's small. The size of it, when you do what's called minify it, you're going to see that in a moment, is only 30K. That's not very big. All right. It's CSS3 compliant. So all the newest, latest and greatest CSS, it's all compliant with jQuery. It's cross-browser, so it's supposed to work the same way on any browser. All right. Well, that's all good news. Okay. So it says here, view source on GitHub, how jQuery works. It's right here. So if I click that, now it's going to ask, what version do you want? How do you want to bring it in, etc. I want to show you the two versions. In other words, I want to show you the compressed version and then the uncompressed version. So I'm first going to click right here where it says compressed. And you look at that and you go, what the heck is that? That is the entire jQuery library, and all white space has been removed from the library. jQuery is a library you bring into your program and you use its contents rather, but you never modify jQuery itself. So you can bring it in like this. This is the 30K size that we just talked about a second ago. On the other hand, if I come back out here and I choose the uncompressed version, well, now you can look at it and it makes sense. All right. But the thing is, if I look at this, this is going to be several thousand lines long, but it's got all of the white space put back in, all of the comments are there, etc. So you can load either one of them. The difference is going to be in the size between the two. This will be 30K. My guess is that'll be something like 10 times that. All right. And typically, you'll if you're going to download it, you'll download the compressed version. Now, what if you don't want to download it at all? Do you have to? The answer is no. So we can go down here and we can find this CDN. All right. And the CDN is Content Delivery Network, which means that we can grab jQuery right from one of these places where it's held on the internet. For instance, if I go to here to Google CDN, right there, I just clicked on that. All right, it says, what do you want? All right, jQuery UI, there's a whole bunch of them here. Okay, so let's say that I want this 3.x snippet. That's probably the latest and greatest. Well, what that'll do is it'll go out to where that's located out on the internet, and it'll make it available to my program. All right. I don't have to store the file. The system will go out and do that for me. That's the good news. The bad news is I now need an internet connection to use anything in my program that's going to use jQuery. And if I don't have the internet connection, I'm at grandma's. Grandma doesn't have any kind of internet connection. She doesn't even have a television. All right. Or I'm someplace where I'm traveling where there's no internet available, etc. This won't work. It's also possible, and we'll talk about this at a later time, to both bring the file in and put a CDN in there. So you can check to see if you've got an internet connection. And if you do, you can tell it to use the CDN version. Otherwise, you can tell it to use the version you've downloaded. All right. And that way it should run all the time. All right. So how to include jQuery in your web page? It's a little different as far as what you have to do. There's the website that I just showed you. And it says here what jQuery offers. Well, I didn't even show you that, so let me quickly. So let me go back again to here. If you want to know what jQuery is all about, you'll click the tab right here that says API documentation. API is an acronym which stands for Application Program Interface. These are all of the different routines that you see in blue here that make up jQuery. Now they said dozens. I don't know how many there are. I've never tried counting them, but I would imagine this is over 100. I don't know. I don't really care. All right. But if I want to use one of these, let's just go up and grab one. 1, 2, 3. I don't want a jQuery one. So let's grab this hover. If I click on it, it'll bring me to the hover page, and they'll even put an example in there for me. So notice when I put my mouse over here and I'm hovering, you can see whatever one I'm over right now, it's got this little red thing next to it. All right. And they highly encourage you to grab, their code. All right. So if I grab this, I'm going to copy it to the clipboard. I'm going to use a totally different editor just so you can see it. All right. So I'm going to come in here. There's the whole thing. And I'm going to do a file save all here. And I'm going to save it to my desktop and just call it hover.html. All right. So there it is. There's hover.html right here. If I double click on it, notice it works. And what's really nice about this is you are highly encouraged as you're learning this, especially to take advantage of all these different methods that are in here. All right. But when we go through it, we're going to use the old 80-20 rule. And what I mean is we're going to use those 20%, teach you the 20% of the methods in there that you'll use 80% of the time. All right. So how to include it? Well, if you rename it, you can name this anything you want. All right. But you can put it right in that JS folder, or you can put it on your desk. You can include it anywhere. Notice how they define this here. It's a free open source JavaScript library that provides methods that make JavaScript programming easier. The top 80% of the top 10,000 or 100,000 websites, meaning around 80,000 of them use jQuery in one form or another. Again, you can use the minified version, which I showed you, or the uncompressed version, which I also showed you, or you can use the content delivery network, I showed you. All right. Now it says to show you how this works on the next page here, and I'm going to give you a break in just a moment. It says that the stuff on the next page shows you some of these selectors, methods, etc., that you'll use with jQuery. So the syntax looks a little weird. This $sign is something different than what we looked at before, but this $sign means what I want to be able to use all H2 headings. So if I apply some jQuery, it will now apply to all H2 headings. This jQuery will now apply to anything with an ID of email address. This jQuery will now apply to anything with a class of warning. What you're going to notice when you look in here is it's going to look somewhat similar to the way that you would do it if you used regular JavaScript or vanilla JavaScript without using jQuery. But jQuery typically will result in less keystrokes And jQuery has got a bunch of stuff that has been pre-written for you, so you don't have to go and take the time to write something. All right. And I don't want to sit and read to you, but if you take a look in there and you look at that description here on the bottom of page 547, they show you some of the more important things regarding jQuery. All right. So it is 9:01. Let's take until 9:15, and then we'll come back and we'll look at the email list application in jQuery. And after we do that, I'm going to go and write a couple programs for you from scratch. All right. So please come back at 9:15. We've only got about 10 pages left in the chapter, and that is to go over the email list application with jQuery. When we're done, I'm going to write a couple very simplistic applications for you, which again, I'll save, and then show you one that I've already written, which is a little bit more complex. So when we go and take a look in here, this is the same program that we looked at before, but now we've added jQuery to it. So the first thing you'll notice is, as they show here in the mustard yellow, is if we're going to add jQuery to our program, we add the jQuery, the reference to it inside of our head section. Now, again, they've done it here, and I'm not sure where they're getting that from, the code.jquery.com. That might be from jQuery itself. It looks like it's a CDN because it starts with HTTP. All right. When you go and add jQuery to a program, please make sure you always put it above your own JS file. In other words, don't flip these because it's possible that you want to be able to use jQuery, all right, inside of your email list.js uh, file. All right. And if you flip them, you wouldn't be able to do that. All right. Other than that, everything is the same as far as the HTML goes. It's the same thing you saw previously. So with the jQuery, well, you'll notice when you look in here, there's a bunch of new stuff, right? And the first thing that you'll notice is virtually everything that is in the program is inside of this thing at the top that says document.ready function. All right. How do I know that basically all of it is in here? Well, if you notice when you look in here, there is a left paren right here. I'm putting my mouse over it right before the word function. And there is a curly brace right at the end of this first line. The ending curly brace is right here, and the ending parenthesis is. So this is all part of the same file. And when you look at it, it's doing the same thing that we did before we were adding the jQuery. The syntax is different. All right. Here we're using, again, $, just like we did before, but this $, means it's now kind of short for jQuery. All right. And we're saying we want the value of whatever was put into that first text box. Then we want the value of whatever was put in that second text box. All right. Then we have that var is valid equal true. So anything that's in here that's not in the mustard yellow is the same code that we had when we wrote this with straight JavaScript. All right. So what we're doing in here is we're using jQuery rather than vanilla JavaScript. And that's really all I want to say, because we're going to have a whole 2 or 3 chapters that we go through that are on jQuery. All right. So all this is meant to be is just a little bit of an introduction to you. All right. And the last part of the chapter gives you 2 or 3 uses of jQuery, of JavaScript, if you knew nothing about programming. And the first one is an image swap, and it's really simplistic. The idea is you've got up here 6 different pictures. These are little thumbnails. And when you click on a thumbnail, and they've clicked on the last one, when you click on a thumbnail, the big picture in here changes. So if I were to click on this one right here, the third one, it looks like a horse that's jumping over, some kind of a barricade. So this would change here. So one of the ways that you can use jQuery, by no means the only way, but one of the reasons that you want to use it is for this image swap type of application. There's other ways you can do it as well, but jQuery is very popular for things like this. All right. And you can see exactly what's happening in there. So they create this unordered list that's called image list. All right. And they display it down here inline. So this is your unordered list right here. But since it's displayed inline, it's all on the same line. And all we have in here for our LIs are literally just the images themselves. All right. And again, what we're telling it to do is basically when we come in here and you click on one of these, make the bigger picture show it here. And that's what they're explaining at the bottom of the page. And again, it's not that this makes a boatload of sense to you right now. Another popular usage for jQuery is in creating slideshows. You can create a slideshow, and you can create a slideshow without using jQuery at all. What this one will do is, and it's not showing, of course, it's not a running slideshow, but if it was, is these pictures will fade out and another one will fade in. And again, how is it set up? Just with a whole bunch of images in here, all right, and you put a little bit of CSS in, but as it says, code the script elements, set up the HTML, and put in the images. The actual code to make this do something, so to speak, all right, is basically you're putting it in right here. It's not doing very much, all right? Resources for tested JavaScript and jQuery are shown on the page here. And they're mentioning that, you can go out to a lot of different sites and get free JavaScript and jQuery code. That doesn't mean you want to go out there and necessarily, go out to some website and find their JavaScript code and grab it and use it. No, I don't mean that. But again, there's a really nice tutorial out on W3 Schools. They have a JavaScript tutorial. They've got a jQuery tutorial out there. I showed you the jQuery UI. You may or may not remember it, but I showed it to you the other day. All right. And that's just a couple of the things that are available to you. And I believe that's actually it. Yep, that's it for the chapter. So let's go build something. All right. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go in and I'm going to move these things over a little bit just so they can be moved over. All right. Try that again. Right here, I'm going to create a new folder and I'm going to create a very simple program for miles per gallon for gas. So I created a folder called MPG. There it is. And I'm going to open it up right away. I'm going to open up the MPG folder and I'll open it with code right away. Okay, so here it is. MPG, there's nothing in it. So I'm doing this all from scratch and I really and truly am. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to create an index.html file. All right, and we'll put in our exclamation point tab and we're going to put in MPG1. All right, I'll rate a few of these. Okay, in fact, let's change the name of this. We won't even call this index. We will call this MPG1, and I'll write 2 or 3 versions of this. All right, so let's also come in and create a new folder. We'll call that folder JS. All right, for JavaScript, and JavaScript files must end with a .js extension. So I'll make a new file in here and I'll call this mpg1.js. So I've got my HTML file and I've got my JS file. All right. And the first thing that I want to do in here is in my HTML file is I want to go in and add that file. So I'm going to say here, script source equals JS/mpg1.js and my script tag. Now I can test it real fast like we had done earlier. I'll just come in here and just do an alert that says, hello. All right, just that. All right, and I'll do a file, save all, then come back to this and run it. And it should just come up with an alert that says hello. Let's see if we can figure out why. Script source equals JS, MPG1, because I put MP1, not MPG1. All right, file, save all, and let's try to run it again. All right, so we'll come back to our HTML file and we'll open it with live server. And there's our hello. Nothing big there, nothing fancy. All right, nothing that should be surprising. But let's put some code in here. And this is really the first time we're going to make this simple. Now, when I say simple, it's much easier for me to say than for you to say as far as being simple. But I'm going to create 3 or what are called variables. So I'm going to say let miles driven equals 0. There's a method to all my madness, so just bear with me for a second. Let gallons used equal 0.0 and let MPG equals 0.0. So what I'm about to do is I'm going to ask the user how many miles they drove. Then I'm going to ask the user how many gallons of gas they used. Then I'm going to divide that miles driven by gallons used to give me the miles per gallon. And I'm going to print that all out. Okay. So I'm going to come in here and say miles driven. In fact, let me get rid of that so we got more room. Equal, and I'm going to use parse float. Don't worry if none of this makes sense. We're going to look at it in just a minute. Prompt, and I'm going to say enter miles driven. Okay. And I'm going to default that. I'm just going to say 100 miles is what you drove. All right. Then I'm going to say gallons used. And I'm going to do the same thing. Parse float, prompt. Oops. Enter gallons used. And again, I will default that. I'll make that 10. All right. And then I'm going to say MPG equals miles driven divided by gallons used. All right. And then I want to print all this out. I'm just going to print it out on the screen. So I'm going to say document dot write. All right. And I'm going to use some special quotes in here. And I'm going to say the miles driven was all right. And then I'm going to say the gallons used was, that'll be gallons used. And finally, I'm going to say the miles per gallon was. All right, before I go back, and I'm going to go over every line of this, but let's see if it works. So I'm going to do a file, save all, and I'm going to go back. You can't run your program. You can't run live server from a JS file, just like you cannot from a CSS file. I'll go back to my HTML file, right mouse click, and choose open with live server. And it comes up and it says enter miles driven. And I'm going to say I drove 345 miles. Okay. And then it says enter gallons used. And I'm going to say I used 12 miles. And now it comes back and it says on the screen, I didn't put any. Oh, what doesn't it like? All right. So let's see, what doesn't it like? It doesn't like, I think, that I use these. All right, because I'm using document.write. So I'm going to put in here, I'm going to change these to double quotes. And I think that that'll fix it, but I have to do one more thing too. All right, right now, if I print it out, it's still going to look pretty junky. So let me change that. My internet connection has dropped a bunch of times, and hopefully you're all still there. So let me get rid of this. And the miles per gallon was. All right, let's see. Did I fix it? MPG. And I don't want that in there. Okay, let's see if I fixed it. All right. So it says enter miles driven, 345. Enter gallons used, 12. All right, I forgot to put in line breaks, but the miles driven was 345. The gallons used was 12. The miles per gallon was 28.75. Let me fix this by just adding line breaks. Okay, so I'm going to put in here \n, \n, and a \n. Let me run it one more time, then we're going to run through every line that's in here. All right, 456, 19, and oh, it doesn't, okay, it wants a BR tag. Oh my goodness. Okay, change these to BRs. I know it's one of the reasons I hate using document.write. All right, let's see if finally, after my third try, if that fixed everything. All right, 378.24. There you go. So the miles driven was 378. The gallons used was 24. The miles per gallon was 15.75. So let's go back and look at every line in that program. All right, so at the beginning here, in lines 1, 2, and 3, we are declaring 3 variables. All right, so I'll put a comment up here so you can see what comments are, and they'll be green. So I'm going to put it, whoop, that should say let. I'm going to put a comment up here that says variable declarations, because I'm declaring 3 variables. When you declare variables in JavaScript, there's 3 ways you can do it. You can put the word var there, which is really never used anymore. You can put in the word let, and you can put in the word const. We're not going to talk about any of them right now, but I just wanted you to see these. Okay. So I've got one, you look at a variable as kind of like being a box that can hold something. So this box is called miles driven, and it'll hold how many miles I drove. Then I've got another box that's called gallons used, and it'll hold how many gallons of gas I used. Then we have another box that's called MPG, and I'll do a simple calculation where I will divide the miles driven by the gallons used, and I will put the result of that division inside my third box, which is called MPG. All right, so what am I doing here? Here I'm declaring my variables. That's what I'm doing, and I'm giving them an initial value. I'm setting all of them equal to 0.0. You don't have to do that. The program would work fine without it. All right, we'll discuss at a later time why you typically do that. So here, I'm going to input value for miles driven. That's what I'm doing there. And then here, I'm going to input a value for gallons used. And that's what I'm doing here. And then down here, I'm going to calculate the miles per gallon. All right. This thing right here, this prompt, that's what made that thing show on the screen. But when you prompt for something and you put it in, even though I put in 345, it wasn't the number 345. It was the string 345. For instance, the address where I work at the Rankin-Wentzville campus is 751 Parr Road. That said, you don't do anything mathematical with that address, so it's really not 751, it's 751. But I'm telling it here to convert it over into a number that can hold a decimal place here and here. Then I'm just doing the divide right here. And then finally, I'm saying print out all variables. And that's my program. Now, that's all fine. Maybe that even makes some sense to you. Hopefully it does. All right. But what happens when I do this? First of all, what happens when I run it? And let's just say that I wasn't paying attention. So I put in here -456 and 23. Now it says I drove a negative 456 miles. I used 23 gallons, and my miles per gallon was a negative 19.83. All right. We'll fix that in just a bit. But before we do, what happens when we do this? So I'm going to run it again. And this is a very forgiving programming language. I'm going to put nothing in there. And I'm going to put nothing in there. And notice what I get. All right. That is a special JavaScript. I don't know if you call it a keyword because it's 3 words. It stands for not a number. Not a number. And I can check and I can see if you put in not a number. And if you did, I can ask you to do it again. All right. How do I do that? Well, I'm going to show you. All right. I'm going to leave this first one exactly the way that it is. Rid of this. And this is the one I'm using here. All right. So I'm going to grab everything that's in this miles per gallon program. And I'm going to copy it to the clipboard. And I'm going to make a new file in here. Why? You'll see why in a minute. So I'm going to put a new file that's going to be called mpg2.html. And I'm going to paste in everything I had in there before. But I'm also going to create now an mpg2 file. I'm going to take everything that was in here, copy it to the clipboard, and then I'm going to create a new file in here. And I'm going to call it mpg2.js, and I'm going to paste all that in. Now, why did I waste my time and your time doing that? I'll show you right now. I'm going to come to the HTML file, and the only thing that's different is I'm using this now. I don't have to change anything else in here. All right, but I do want to make changes in this file now. I want to check, and if you put in something that was illegal, in other words, if you put in something non-numeric, I want to ask you to do it again. All right, so I'm going to put here one-time validation of miles driven field. So I'm going to say in here, if is not a number, miles driven. So if you put in something that's non-numeric, I'm just going to ask you to do it again. So I'm going to copy in these 2 lines. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing down here. And I'm going to say, again, it'll be a one-time validation. So let me just grab all of it and then just make a couple changes. So one-time validation of the gallons used field. Again, this will be gallons used. And so will this. Oops. Right? Now I called it a one-time validation for a reason. Okay, so let me save it and let me run it and show you exactly what I mean. So now I'm running this. I'm running my MPG, I'm running my MPG2 program. Okay. All right. So let me run that. Looks the same, but I'm going to leave it blank. And now notice when I left it blank, it comes up and it asks me to do it again. So it again says enter miles driven. I'll just use the default of 100. Now it says enter gallons used. Well, I'm going to put in there some garbage. And it asks me again to put in the miles driven, and I'll leave it at the default of 10. Now it worked. That's good. But it's still incomplete because, again, when we did this and we checked with an if statement like we just did in here, I call an if a one-time shot because we're saying if you put in something bad, I'm going to let you redo it. But what if you put in something bad the second time? All right. So if I come in here and I put in, just leave it blank, then do it again and leave it blank, and then do the same thing for gallons used, I still get all those NaNs, which isn't what I want. All right. Plus, it still doesn't handle a negative number. Okay. So let's fix that. Let's make a third iteration of this and let's fix that. All right. So I'm going to grab this. In fact, let's do it like this. Open this up and I'm going to do my MPG. I'm going to copy this and just paste it and this, and then rename it. So this will be mpg3.html. All right. And it will be using mpg3.js in just a moment. So I'm going to grab this one right here and I'm going to copy it. And then I'm going to paste it. And there that is. And I'm going to make this, I'm going to rename it to mpg3. All right. I want this to work. In other words, if you put in nothing, or if you put in something that's less than 0, I don't want to accept it. I'm saying this again. If you come in here, when you do this, and you either put in something non-numeric, you leave it blank, you put in a letter or whatever, or you put in something negative, I don't want it accepted. So I'm going to change this from the word if to the word while. And I'm going to, whoops, you have to spell it right. While either, while is not a number, or, I do that for or, miles driven is less than or equal to 0. So if that's the case, I'm going to ask you to do it again. If you still do it bad, I'm going to ask you again. If you still do it bad, I'm going to ask you again. So I'm changing that from an if. So this will be a full validation of this. And then we'll do the same thing down here. And we will make this a full validation of gallons used. So we will put this in here as a while. All right. And again, this will become gallons used less than or equal to 0. All right. So let me save that. Let me remove anything that's open from number 2. Go back to my number 3, which is right here. Do a file, save. Make sure this one's saved too. So file save. All right. And let's run this third one. And let's leave it blank. And it says miles driven. And it keeps saying it. Let's put in something that's not numeric. And it clears it out and it's asking. All right. So let's just put in 345. And we'll do the same thing here. Leave it blank, blank, blank. Put in something non-numeric. Finally, all right, we put in valid values. All right, so we've done 3 things here. In the first one that we did, we put no validation in whatsoever, and you saw what happened when we did that. Then the second time through there, we put in a little bit of validation. All right, we just checked for it, make sure that what we put in there was numeric. All right, then we did the third one where we checked to make sure it was numeric and it was positive. All right. Now I'm going to make one more of these. All right. And I'm not trying to waste my time, and I'm certainly not trying to waste yours, but I'm going to make one more to show you one last thing here. So let me copy this. So this will become 4, as will this in just a minute. All right. All right. Now in this fourth one, let's do one more thing. At the top of our program, we're going to check to make sure, all right, that we're going to add what are called constants. So we're going to assume, and constants are usually made, not always, but in uppercase. So I'm going to call this min miles driven. We're going to assume the smallest number of miles that would be driven would be 1 mile. And we're going to assume that the most miles driven are going to be equal to 1,000. And then we're going to assume that the minimum gallons used, all right, we'll just call it min, well, we can call it min gallons used. All right. We will set that equal to 1, and we will have a max gallons used. And we will set that equal to, let's say, 100. All right. Now, we haven't done anything with this yet. All right. But now we can change this. All right. And we can say if it is not numeric, or, and I'm going to put this on a new line so you can see all of it, or gallons, oops, I'm sorry, it's miles driven. Miles driven is less than min miles, or the miles driven is greater than max miles. All right. Now I'm handling anything. Also, I'm not only handling non-numeric, but I'm that's less than 1 or greater than 1,000. Now, it would be kind of nice when I do this, instead of saying enter miles driven, to let them know what that was supposed to be. So I can just manually, if I want, I can do it another way, but for now, we'll just say 1 through 1,000. Just so that they know what they should be putting in there for miles driven. And we'll do the same thing in here. Okay. Now let's put in a similar thing down here for gallons used. All right. So I'm going to grab this and I'm going to get rid of it. And I'm going to say gallons used is less than min gallons used, or gallons used, oops, gallons used is greater than max gallons used. All right. So again, we're going to tell them in here that they should put in gallons between 1 and 100. We'll tell them that here too. All right. So now, I guess before we could say full validation. We had that before, but I'll put it here using constants. All right. And now you'll notice when I do a file save all on here, and I jump back into my, let's get rid of the 3 here and here, and we'll open up this one and we will run it. Now, if I put in nothing, still doesn't take it. If I put in something non-numeric, still doesn't take it. But if I put in 0 now, all right, didn't like something. It's sitting there spinning. So let's see why it was spinning. All right. So I'm saying here while, oh, okay. Yeah, while it's less than or equal to, come back and asked. So let's see. While it's less than that, or it's removing my parens here, and I like them in here. I've got a bunch of things set for the editor, and that's why it's doing some funky stuff in here. So let's view word wrap. All right. So if I put in miles driven is less than min miles, because it's called min miles driven, that's why it would blew up. All right. And that's max miles driven. That's why the program blew up, because it was looking for a variable that didn't exist. Let's try it again. All right. If you put in nothing, doesn't take it. If you put in non-numeric, doesn't take it. If you put in a value 0, doesn't take it. If you put in a negative value, doesn't take it. You finally put in a positive value, it takes it. Then for gallons used, with nothing in there, doesn't take it. With non-numeric, doesn't take it. With something real big, doesn't take it. With something real small, it doesn't take it. All right. So what I've shown you, maybe I didn't do that good a job, but I tried to run through a few fairly simple examples. Now, if you've never seen it before, that isn't simple. All right. So I'm going to come up here and add another comment that says here, constant declarations. All right. What is the difference between a variable and a constant? All right. A variable is designed so that its value can change during the life of the program. A constant is set up so it should be a one and done. So you set it and forget it type of thing. So if you've got something like, for example, if I was doing a program where I was doing conversions, I might have a constant that was called inches in a foot and set it equal to 12. I might have another constant that was called feet in a yard that I set equal to 3, etc. All right. And then we got our variable declaration. And then here we are reading in the value for our variable. Now that prompt, literally, you can prompt anything, but that's literally what it said on the screen right there was enter miles driven, then it had in parentheses 1 through 1,000. All right. Then whatever we put in there, it attempted to convert it to a number which can conceivably have a decimal place in it. If the conversion did not work, all right, so if it was not numeric, or if we put in a number for miles driven that was less than 1, or we put in a value for miles driven that was greater than 1,000, if any of those were true, we asked you to do it again. But since it's in a while loop is what it's called, we loop or we stay in there until you actually put in a value that indeed is valid. Then we do the same thing. So we don't get to this line until in here, we either up here put in a value that was numeric between 1 and 1,000, or in here, we put in a value that was numeric in between 1 and 1,000. So by using a while loop in there for our data validation, we have fully validated that value. Not only was it fully validated, but it must fall within a range. This is a range check right here. We are checking to make sure that the range of values we put in are between 1 and 1,000. If they're within range, boom, we ask for the next thing. If they're not within range, we ask you to do it again. And after we ask you to do it again, we come right back in and we check it again. So again, the idea is you do not get down to line 24, that blank line, until either you entered a valid value, a numeric value between 1 and 1,000 in line 13, or you did it in line 22. Then when we get done, we do the same thing with gallons used. All right, so that was miles driven. This is gallons used. So once we get down to here, we have to have a valid value for each one of those. All right. Now, what if we didn't want to do this? What if we didn't want to print it out like this? All right. What if we wanted it to print out as one of those alerts like I showed you before? Well, let's see if we can do that. So I'm going to say in here, alert, miles driven. I'm going to try a \n here. It may work and it may not. And I'm going to say gallons used. And then finally, I'm going to say miles per gallon. All right. Hopefully I didn't make any errors in there. If I did, the program won't run. But I'm going to do a file, save all, and then let's try to run it. Put in just some random values. So 297. That's how many miles we drove. And let's say we used 13.69 gallons. All right. Well, it didn't give me all of the stuff in here. I do have one line break, but not the other one didn't work. So miles driven, 297, gallons used, 13.69, miles per gallon, 21.69. And then there's our regular values. All right. So there's different ways that we can display this. All right. So the miles driven, the gallons used, I didn't put a \n in there. That's why it looked a little funky. Let's run it one last time here. So 456, 12.34. There it is. Miles driven, 456. Gallons used, 12.34. Miles per gallon, 36.35. And there it is. Or 95, I guess it was. All right. The only other thing that I really didn't mention was this tells it to set it to 2 decimal places. You can put any number in there you want, but 2 seemed like it would make sense. In fact, speaking of cents, but the other type, if I was doing a program with dollars and cents, all right, I probably would set that figure to 2 fixed 2 as well. All right. So what that was designed to do, was to just show you a couple of examples. All right. And again, I will save this so you can take a look at it. All right. But I want to show you one more thing, and then we're going to call it a period. Let me exit there. And I think this is open, but let me double check. No, it was not. That's okay. So let me close this and this. Let's see what I have open here. This was that garbage example, so we don't need that either. All right, but I'm going to open up this one. It's got a dumb name now, but it'll make more sense a little later. This is the one I'd shown you before. Make it a little bigger so you can see everything. Okay. This is part of a website I'd like us to build as a class. All right. Right now, the home doesn't do anything. The about doesn't do anything. The FAQ doesn't do anything. The contact doesn't do anything. But the BMI brings up the page you see right here. And you can see these asterisks. These are similar. I did it like this because that's how they did it in the book. And you'll notice I'm going to come in and I'm going to put garbage in here for each of these. All right, and click calculate. And I get a message. The height must be between there, plus the height disappears after a certain amount. And if I do put in something valid here, I get the same type of message for the other one. Then the value disappears, and so does the message. And if I put in here 100 pounds, so that's somebody who's 6.5 feet tall, almost at 100 pounds, it shows you that they're underweight. All right. Then I can reset the form and everything goes back to the way it was. Then I can go in and do 77 pounds at 188. They're of optimal weight. All right. Then I can reset it again. It's not letting me reset it, but it's not. Might be my internet connection again, too. It says it's not responding. There we go. So if I say that they're 222 pounds, they're overweight. And if I say that they're 333 pounds, they're obese. All right. So everything that's in here appears at least to work. And what I want to show you, and I'll do this between now and about 10:15 or so, and then we'll call it a period. All right. I will put this example out there along with the other 4 that I did just a few minutes ago, but I want to show you the code. So first of all, shouldn't be a lot of surprises in here as far as this is the HTML. Now I did put a linkage in here. I thought I did. No, maybe I didn't. All right. So here's all the stuff that we typically get. Here's our CSS file. I did add a favicon. All right. And I've got a nav section with a navigation bar. Actually, it's all in the header with a logo and the navigation bar. All right. Then inside of main, I've got an H1 that says BMI calculator, and there's here. And that's the form that you saw. Then at the bottom, here's the footer. And to show you, we can link to jQuery down here. This is a really, I grabbed this from something I did a couple years ago. That's why there's a lot newer version than 2.1.4, but it works just fine anyway. And here's the linkage to our file. Again, I can grab these 2 files. What I really should do is to grab those and put them up in the head section here, like that. All right. And I'm going to fix this one in a second, but in here, I will type defer. All right. Now, just to show you this, I'm going to go back again, as I did earlier, close a couple of these. I got way too much garbage running here. All right. So I'm going to go out to jQuery.com. All right. And I'm going to go to download, and I'm going to go to the CDN right there. jQuery CDN provided by StackPath. Well, where is it? See all the files and versions. I don't know what that is, but you already know this. I can go to cdnjs.com. And in here, I'm going to search for jQuery. There it is. I'm going to grab the copy script tag, the one in the middle, and then I'm going to replace that with the one that's in here with that. All right, it's got a lot of garbage stuff in it, but it's now got version 3.6.3. And then here's my file. All right. In the nav, there's nothing new. The only thing that leads to something is the bmi.html, because that's the only file that's in there. Again, you'll notice that in these spans, I've got the asterisk, and I made that asterisk red inside of the CSS file. Let's take a quick look at that. All right, border box, don't worry about the overlay. It was something I was screwing around with. Background color for the body, telling it to take up the whole screen. There's the stuff for the logo. But there's that span, so that's the asterisk, telling it that the color should be red and it should be bold. Transforming it to uppercase, all right, etc. Okay, not a lot of really new stuff in here. All right, and then finally, let's take a look at the JavaScript file. And again, not expect this to make a boatload of sense to you. All right. Well, these were the images. So that's my favicon right there. That's the logo. There's the obese, the optimal weight, the overweight. I wanted to set something up so that if there was an error, I just made an unavailable thing. And there's the underweight. All right, so let's quickly look at the JavaScript file that's in here, and we'll call it a period. All right. Here I put in a multi-line comment. So when I put in the other comments before, it was 2 forward slashes, slash. What that does is it makes a comment for that line. After the slash, everything to the right of that becomes a comment. This is a multi-line comment. And what's a comment? It's code that you put in there for humans to read that the computer basically ignores. So I said this was a body mass index program and what BMI is, what the formula is for BMI, all right? And what I put in for constants, for minimum and maximum height, for minimum and maximum weight. And this is the BMI chart, so to speak, that if you've got a calculated BMI that's less than 18.5, you're underweight, greater than equal or equal to 18.5 but less than 25, you're optimal weight, greater than or equal to 25 but less than 30, you're overweight, and over 30, you're obese. This is from the National Institute of Health. It's not my stuff. Then I made a bunch of declarations in here. Everything that you see that has const in front of it, all right, those are constants. So the maximal height I expect somebody to be is one, or the minimum I should say, is 12 inches or 1 foot. The maximum height would be 8 feet. The minimum weight would be 1 pound. The maximum weight would be 777 pounds. These are all purely arbitrary. I could have put anything in there that we wanted to put in there. All right. Then notice I've got min optimal. The minimum weight that you can be to be optimal weight is 18.5. So if it's less than min optimal, you're underweight. The minimum amount for overweight is 25. All right. So if you are over greater than or equal to 25, but less than 30, all right, you're overweight. And the min obese, if you're greater than or equal to 30, you're obese. The is valid is the same thing they used in the book. It's a Boolean variable. Then I've got a couple more variables, or 3. Those are called string variables. They hold sequences of characters. And this, I don't expect you to understand much of any of this, because what I did in here was I wrote a very modular program. So rather than writing everything in one big routine, which you can do, I wrote a lot of little routines. So I knew if there was a problem in a routine, I wanted to jump into a routine and know it was one of these 5 or 10 lines, not that it was one of these 100 lines in one routine someplace. All right. So what this is going to do is this is going to basically check to see if there was an error in the height, if there was an error in the weight. This is going to go through and actually attempt to do the calculation. What does that mean? Well, notice I have in here parse int. I could have made it a float. The difference between these is a float is a number that can, C-A-N, can have a decimal place, and int is a whole number that cannot, repeat, cannot have a decimal place. But I could have just as easily made these floats. The program would work just fine. Oops, if as long as I spelled float correctly. And now if somebody is 6 feet 3.5 inches, we could put that in. Okay. All right. Then I said, I want you to validate the height. How is it validating the height? It's saying if the height is not numeric, or it's less than a minimum, or it's greater than the maximum, all right, we are going to replace this asterisk right here. We are telling it right there to replace that with this text. A height must be between, or a height between, what are they? 12 and 96 is required. All right. And then we're telling that error message to go away after 5 seconds. And we're telling it to put the focus right back there. All right. So put the cursor back there, and it's returning false because it failed. Otherwise, get rid of that asterisk because we put in a valid height. All right. Then we do the same thing. We say, hey, if it was valid, and what this means was we had a valid height, then validate the weight. And we do the same kind of thing. But rather than checking to see if there's a height between 12 and 96, we check to see if there is a weight between 1 and 777. Supposing we put in something valid there, then we tell you to calculate the BMI and put the result in the right place. Okay, how do we do that? Well, that's pretty simple. And if that doesn't make any sense to you, don't worry about it. That figures out the BMI. After we figure out the BMI, we tell it to set the status. That is one of 4 words or 5 words: underweight, optimal weight, overweight, or obese. So what that does is it comes in there and it says, hey, if your BMI was less than 18.5, you're underweight. If it was between 18.5 but less than 25, you're optimal weight. If it's between 25 but less than 30, you're overweight. Otherwise, you're obese. And we set that text box with that value. And then finally, we set the picture. And that was those little pictures that I had in there. That was, believe it or not, the hardest part of the program. All right. So what we have in here is we are actually doing a lot of the stuff that was explained in the chapter. For instance, there's some jQuery in here, there's some event handling in here, etc. Right. So again, what I will do at the end of class today, and I'm not going to lie to you and say, hey, this is the best program ever. This is something I wrote a while ago that I went and did some modifications to yesterday. It's something that as we go on, at least hopefully, we'll be able to go in and look at it in the confines of some other stuff that we're going to be able to do. All right, as we go on. 2 more things. Number 1, once again, tomorrow and Friday are both lab days. I'm not taping. I will be online both of those days. So if you've got questions, feel free to email me at jpscott@rankin.edu. All right. Secondly, your homework is due Sunday. Now, your chapter 10 homework, if you had not turned it in yet, is due tonight by midnight. But your chapters 11 through 15 is due on Sunday. So as far as I'm concerned, come Monday morning, we're totally done with this book. But on Monday, we're going to jump into Bootstrap. All right. Now, if you want to get started on that, and if you say, I don't have time, okay. But if you do want to get started on that, again, you can go out to getbootstrap.com. Not only is this a terrific site because there's tons of code examples in it, but it's very well written. If you've never heard the story, and I'll keep it simple, you'll notice there's a thing up here for Twitter, because originally Bootstrap was called Twitter Bootstrap because it was written by 2 employees from Twitter. All right. But we will start on Monday by taking a big dive into the Bootstrap documentation. I'm not saying we'll look at everything in there, but we'll look at quite a bit. Then we'll look at some of the examples that are in here. All right. We'll look at some of these. Again, not all of them, but we'll look at a few of them. Now, one of the things that you learned just in the last week was we went out to Font Awesome and you learn how to bring in icons. Well, with Bootstrap 5, they've really upgraded their icons and they've got a lot more. You can still go in and use Font Awesome. All right, but there's a lot of stuff in here now. All right, so we'll look at that. We'll talk a little bit about themes, and there's a blog that they have on this. But again, the idea is on Monday, we will create something together. It won't be a masterpiece, but we'll probably do it in 2 different ways. The first way is we'll probably just keep going out to the different docs and the examples and just grabbing stuff and just creating something on the fly. All right. And if you're interested, again, there are a lot of good things in here. I started watching this the other day, but again, you've heard me trumpet this guy before, but Brad Traversy has a Bootstrap 5 crash course. And it looks like, I don't know how long it was. It's not short. It's an hour and 18 minutes. All right. There's another site that I use quite a bit. The guy's name is Kyle Cook, and he's got a site called Web Dev Simplified. And he's got one that again is a maybe 10 minutes, 5 or 10 minutes shorter, but a Bootstrap 5 crash course. All right. I'm going to look at both of those this weekend. I might even pull out some of their code. I don't know. All right. So unless either one of you, hopefully that are still watching, and I'm sorry, my internet did go down a few talks. So if it seemed like for a while I paused, that was why. All right. But unless either one of you have any questions, that's what I had for today. And I will talk to you then on Monday. Have a good weekend.
You as well. Thank you.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you. Thank you.